Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this webinar on pandemic insights, revealing the essential of heritage conservation. It is organized as part of the ICCROM lecture series in partnership with Athabasca University and the International Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, IIC. We aim to continue the reflection and discussion initiated last year with the webinar on heritage conservation learning in the COVID world, challenges and opportunities, which you can watch on the ICCROM YouTube channel. For those of you who do not yet know ICCROM, we are an intergovernmental organization working in the service of 137 member states across the world to promote the conservation of all forms of cultural heritage for the benefit of all people. Today's webinar will explore the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on conservation and conservation learning across the broadest scope of our works. Panelists coming from different realms of the wider conservation field will share their views by answering to 3 questions about what the pandemic revealed as essential of heritage conservation for themselves individually. So the first question is an inward look for society, so what we are referring to as looking out, and for the future. The third question then refers to looking forward. We would also like to hear your opinion during the webinar, so please be ready to participate in a poll, to ask questions, and also to share your views. For questions and comments, please use the Q&A icon that you see at the bottom of the Zoom window. We are looking forward to your participation. In case we don't have time to put all the answers provided by the panelists on this webinar, we will post them later on the ICCROM lecture series page, as we did before with the earlier webinar. So let me now welcome my dear co-facilitators. So the first one is Professor Shabnam Inaludailu from Athabasca University. Hello, Shabnam, and welcome to the webinar.
Hello, Zeka. Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
And Professor Jane Henderson, the Secretary General of IIC. Hello, Jane. Welcome to the webinar.
Hello, welcome, everyone.
We are very pleased to be joined today by 7 speakers representing heritage professionals and students from around the world. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce them to you. So we will start with Audrey Dawn Tomada, Head of Administrative Officer 5 at the National Museum of the Philippines in Bohol. Hello, Audrey. Welcome to the webinar.
Hi, good evening to everyone.
Then we have Claire Fry, a preventive conservation consultant at Spencer & Fry in the United Kingdom. Welcome, Claire. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Next, we have Eleonora Sermoneta, student and Heritage Resource Management Program at Athabasca University. And she's also the adult programmer at the Royal Alberta Museum in Canada. Hello, Eleonora. Welcome to the webinar.
Hi.
The next panelist is Fedra Komodromo. Fedra is a student representative at Cardiff University. She's taken a master's course in conservation practice and also from the United Kingdom. Hello, Fedra, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
The next speaker is Simon Warwick, Stone Conservator. Simon is also a conservation consultant, originally based in Italy. I assume now you are in Cambodia, Simon, hopping around, so welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very happy to see everyone, even if it's just on screens.
Our next speaker will be Stavroula Golfomitsu, who is senior lecturer at the Department of Conservation at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. Welcome, Vula. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you all.
And last but not least, very pleased to introduce to you Terence Besaka. Terence is the Cultural Heritage Manager and Coordinator of Collections and Storage at the National Museum of Cameroon. Welcome, Terence. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you
The
very
first
much, and
question-
hi to
First question to our dear panelists will be moderated by Shabnam. So Shabnam, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zeka. Hello, everyone, and welcome again. So I'm tasked with asking the first question from our panelists, and the question is, what did you discover was essential about conservation that perhaps the pandemic revealed to you or brought into focus? So I would like to invite Audrey to start us off with responding to this question.
Thank you, Shabnam. Again, thank you, Ikram, for inviting me to this webinar. I'd like to start, of course, the National Museum of the Philippines, as with the rest of the cultural heritage sector, have been greatly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So as an institution whose core function is to promote, preserve, and conserve heritage, the pandemic has disrupted our museum services, programs, and all planned activities in the areas of research, exhibitions, collections care, as well as our ongoing restoration projects. So as a national government agency, due to the pandemic, our museum priorities changed and budgets decreased and have been realigned. And then with the imposed restrictions, lockdowns, and community quarantines, we had to implement a skeletal and other alternative working arrangements for our personnel. We were basically frozen, to say the least, during the second quarter of 2020, wherein everything came to a full stop and we were prevented to monitor our projects and field sites. In fact, our museums were closed to the public for a year until March 13 this year. So the pandemic definitely caught us unaware. Up to now, we still worry about the next lockdowns in our communities. However, dealing with the pandemic has highlighted again what disasters have taught us. So emergency preparedness, documentation, and community-based preventive conservation practice. So back in 2013, the island of Bohol in the Philippines was struck by a 7.2 magnitude earthquake, which destroyed several centuries-old churches declared as national cultural treasures, some of them leveled to the ground. So that disaster started the National Heritage Restoration and Rebuilding Program in our region under our care. So at the time of the pandemic, we had 3 church projects in their completion stages, which included restoration and conservation of movable properties and cultural features of the church. So during the lockdown, as we could not travel, it was the technical working group of the churches who became our eyes and ears on the ground, and their willing presence made the conservation work activities possible, while our contractors continued with the work on site. Also, during post-earthquake and recovery period, we already formed volunteer groups from these communities. The National Museum facilitated skills training and development for these individuals to create a collective, enduring, and sustainable conservation program. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, this system did not function due to various factors involved, such as volunteers on lockdown, change in leadership, and even deaths in members. So most of the volunteers are elderly women. They were senior citizens who were unable to continue conservation work during the lockdowns. Hence, it is important for information about the collections and the skills in conserving them to be passed on to the next generation, and to involve the youth volunteers to ensure the pandemic basically taught us to be flexible, modify and apply what can and what cannot, and hopefully we are able to come up with a better conservation framework for the future. A framework that ensures continuity and sustainability amidst transitions, and engages the full cooperation of the church, the community, and the local government to work as partners in conserving these churches and their heritage and their ecclesiastical heritage. That's all.
Thank you so much, Audrey. It seems that you have gone through a lot. Keep up the good work. That's great. Thank you. So Claire, what are your thoughts? What have you been with?
Hello. So I think the thing that became apparent to me during the pandemic was how important collaboration is in the conservation profession. It's good to work together, and great things, we find solutions when we do. And I think the example that came to my mind, or why I thought that, was during the pandemic, we were faced with new challenges. We had museums, historic houses, churches contacting us, asking how they should implement measures advised by people like Public Health England on how to sanitize or disinfect everything in their museums or historic houses. A conversation with Historic England came to fruition that they said that they would provide some guidance, which was fantastic. And already the conservation profession was sharing really good information. So the National Centre for Preservation, Technology and Training, Canadian Conservation Institute, Church of England back here in the UK, because churches were opening up sooner over here than museums. And the Library of Congress had all done some really interesting work in this area and was sharing it, so everybody could benefit from that, which was great. I also put a post out on social media, on LinkedIn, asking for information if anybody else was looking into this, and got lots of responses, which was brilliant. Sort of with further collaboration, a group was brought together. There was a microbiologist, several specialist conservators who specialize in different types of materials, a conservation, and Spencer and Fry, and we all got together to try and work out how, if it would be possible that disinfection could take place, and if so, how. I think that was sort of one form of collaboration. I also really appreciated personally the conservation community. Lots of articles, resources, conferences took place online. I found this very supportive. I don't think all professions are like this, and there were some really dark days during this pandemic. My company had no work, and it was really nice just to connect with other conservators. That's it.
Wonderful, thank you. I think one thing that we can all agree is that amount of resources that have been produced, shared, criticized, and also again reevaluated. So that's amazing to see how the community, professional community, can come together. Thank you so much, Claire. So now I want to hear from Eleonora and Phaedra. What did you hear from students? What are your perspectives, personal perspectives?
Okay, I guess I'll start. Well, obviously, we're contributing the students' perspective here today. And in order to represent the student perspective with accuracy, we reached out to them, learned about their experiences, and discovered what was essential to them about heritage conservation during COVID. My colleague Phaedra from Cardiff University and I decided to revive the social media that I used last year during our previous webinar, Heritage Conservation Learning in the COVID World, Challenges and Opportunities, to reconnect and interact with students, and also to disseminate a survey that we prepared and that I will be sharing in a moment, so you can see some results. So once again, our goal was to give fellow heritage conservation students a platform to express their questions and concerns. And this year we surveyed about 100 international students, and I'm going to launch my presentation, so bear with me. So yeah, we're going to learn a little bit more about what we discovered about students. There we go. Is the graph visible? I hope so. Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, as I was saying, we surveyed international students. You can see from the graph that a pretty big chunk is from Europe and North America, but we also received fantastic feedback from Asian, African, and South American students, and of course from Oceania as well. We even accepted responses to our survey in 6 languages in order to reduce barrier communications. And yeah, you can just see, you know, the different respondents and where they were based. And the respondents were affiliated to more than 50 universities worldwide. So these included, for example, Cardiff Universities, of course, Athabasca Universities, National School of Architecture and Urbanism in Tunis, the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, the South Valley University in Egypt, University of Dubrovnik in Croatia, Lumbini Buddhist College in Nepal, just to name a few. And this was quite a good mix and provided us with meaningful insights about diverse situations, as well as trends that emerged in heritage conservation learning during the pandemic worldwide. And for example, we also learned that 72.2% of the students are currently still experiencing restrictions. So according to the data that we collected, the situation in many universities is far from being back to normal. And these restrictions very often translated into a lack of practical training. This is a pretty hot topic within the heritage conservation student communities because, of course, hands-on work, the acquisitions of practical skills and course lab time are regarded as the absolutely essential to the training of the next generation of heritage conservation professionals. And speaking of lab time, just to give you an idea of the current situation, a very relevant percentage of students, a good 52.6%, reported that they had between 0 and 4 hours of lab activities per week over the last year, while only 15.4% stated that they had access to over 25 hours per week of hands-on training, especially in Australia, where the reopening is progressing way faster than in other countries. So clearly, this is a lucky minority compared to those who have reported having just 1 hour of practical work over the whole academic year, or those who were offered the opportunity to withdraw from or postpone practical courses. And given the essential role of practical training, some hybrid solutions emerged, for example, home lab, restoring common objects that students could find in their households. But students reported that these home alternatives were challenging from a logistical standpoint and not actually a replacement for a real lab time. Fedra will illustrate other aspects that students considered essential in terms of heritage conservation learning during the pandemic. And I'll be passing the microphone to Fedra. So please, Fedra, just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide.
Thank you, Eleonora. Can you please go to the next slide? So the data has shown that 75.6% of students considered hands-on learning and training opportunities as an essential part of their conservation training. As Eleonora mentioned, 52.6% of students expressed that they spent between 0 and 4 hours per week in the lab or on site. The low number of hours spent developing practical skills reflected in the students' mental health and their uncertainty in whether they should continue their studies or defer for a year in the hopes that the next academic year would not be as affected by the pandemic. As you can see on the graph, 39.53% of students have either considered deferring or have actually done so. This is over 1 in 3 students who have taken the survey. When asked to give further details on the matter, the majority mentioned that the lack of practical skills is the primary reason for deferring or thinking about doing so. Next slide, please. Another essential aspect of conservation learning, which was brought up during the pandemic, was the need for access to books and other learning resources. Over 61% of students claimed that they found it difficult to find resources during this past academic year. A recurring issue mentioned by them was the temporary closure of university and public libraries. This prevented students from accessing physical copies of books and finding quiet study spaces. This has had multiple effects, such as a loss of productivity and an increase in the utilization of less reliable, non-peer-reviewed articles and lecture notes, which has had the potential effect on students' grades. As for students who have had some access to libraries, Many of them affirmed that while an effort was made by librarians to send out books by post or prepare them for pickup, both were lengthy processes. One must also consider that books were often left in quarantine in between loans in order to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Therefore, if a specific source was needed by a number of students for the completion of an assignment, there would not be enough time for it to be passed around amongst the students prior to the assessment deadline. In summary, physical access to libraries for heritage conservation students is an essential aspect of their studies. The lack of access to them this year affected productivity, increased level of stress among students, and affected their overall performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleonora and Phaedra. It's really revealing to see the numbers and how the pandemic continues actually to impact students' learnings at different levels, I believe undergraduate, graduate levels. So thank you so much for sharing the results of your survey. And I would like to turn it over to Simon, please. So what has been your experience during the pandemic?
Very different because I have been, I do a different type of training. I'm not working in university, I'm working hands-on on site. So my experience has been in two countries, firstly in Lebanon, where I worked for 7 months teaching local staff and refugees from Syria about how to carve stone, which had a lot of difficulties, as you can imagine. Lebanon has its own difficulties, and it was not helped by the explosion that happened a few days before I arrived, and then COVID during the middle of COVID, plus an economic crash. So there were a lot of challenges there. Quickly, actually, it became interesting because the situation was so bad on so many levels that COVID kind of faded a little bit. People had too many other problems. We, however, had to really change our methods and really carefully plan. But I'll come on to that actually in the second part, because I wanted to respond clearly to the question, which is what did you discover was essential about conservation that perhaps the pandemic revealed to you or brought into focus? Well, what became clear both in Lebanon and where I am now, which is in Cambodia, was the importance of people, which my colleague from the Philippines mentioned, because conservation is also a source of employment. I'm not talking about the training, I'm talking about the actual activity. And so in Cambodia, the impact on the employment has been not too bad because everybody is employed by the government. So they're working in this, the sector that they're working in hasn't been overly affected. Those employed by international projects are able to continue as far as I can see. What is interesting is the usual buzzword of sustainability. Planning and sustainability, I've headed it, because some resources are becoming scarce. So it's therefore an interesting exercise in whether sustainability is real or not. If conservation has been planned properly to use locally sourced materials, they can continue. But if they're dependent on expensive materials that require shipping and so on, then the operations become much more problematical. So there's an issue about that. And so what COVID is doing is actually proving a really hard test to a lot of the things that we've all the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and it seems to be okay here, but I don't know for how much longer. The other thing, and here I'm about to kind of shoot myself in the foot, but is the question of international experts, of which we all are. Are they so essential now? Because one of the things that I discussed with the head of communications for the local heritage authority was that in some ways they see this as an opportunity to actually carry to use their own staff, to use their own people who have been trained over decades. And this is actually an opportunity for many of them to take in some way take control. I'm not saying that the international effort is not meaningful, because it certainly is here, and it's carried out the most extraordinary amount of training. But that training has made it possible for the local people to continue with a much lower presence of the international experts. So that's quite an interesting feature. They had these gigantic meetings here, and now they're all being done online. And it's interesting to see that whether that's really an impact. Is it okay to have these meetings online, which is obviously a huge saving in resources, or is it better to have the people here? Today they had site visits and photographs and so on. One point I feel we should consider is the effect on the heritage, especially here in Cambodia, which has been almost completely positive. You see, while the effect on the people has been almost completely negative. So this indicates that there's still a gap between the well-being of the heritage and the well-being of the people, which has not been fully addressed and certainly needs to be. The actual impact on the heritage is extraordinary, and I'll just show you a couple of pictures to give you an idea of what the situation is like. I'm going to go to screen sharing here. Or am I? Screen share. No, I'm not. Oh yes, here we are. Now the impact on tourism here has been quite extraordinary because there are no more visas being issued for visitors. So there has been a 93% drop in tourism. The impact of that is, this was the situation before the situation before the COVID hit. This was what the temples looked like. This is what it looks like today. From one girl who was sitting there with a counter trying to see how many people were coming through. This was the town, and this is what it's like right now. This was the temple, and that's the temple now. And this is the result. All the businesses have closed down. Everything is the rents have dropped 300%. There are very few places remaining open because people's livelihoods have been destroyed, because this is a country which is dependent on the income from heritage. The tourism, and thus, which is heritage tourism, is 19% of the GDP, which is one of the highest, I think, after Egypt in the world. So the impact has been quite enormous. I won't show you any more because it's sad to see, but that is, so those are my comments on the first question that was asked, and I hope that was some way answered it. Thank you very much for listening.
Yes, thank you so much, Simon. Oh, the images are just, stunning. It's unbelievable, the impact of the pandemic. And you raised a really good point in terms of imbalance between the well-being of heritage and well-being of people. I hope we'll have a chance to talk about it more in the next round and the last one probably. So thank you so much for that. And now I would like to ask Vula, what are your thoughts about this?
Thank you. So I would say that in a nutshell, the first take for me is how we need to diversify our teaching and keep a flexible and open-minded approach to teaching and learning. And hearing Eleonora and Fedra actually makes it even more important now. So living in pandemic was a very interesting experience. For me, it had many positive outcomes. Generally speaking, we all learn new ways of doing things, improved our digital skills, learn how to organize online platforms to promote engagement and dialogue with the students, even though I know that all of us got like Zoom fatigue and being very, very tired, being in front of screens. However, we found ways to work around it. And also, we experimented with alternative ways of teaching and learning, especially in relation to practical sessions. So I hope we have at the end some time to discuss this part. So working and teaching online meant that we could connect without having the risk of infection. But the biggest advantage for all of us, getting accustomed to working online, was how we could connect with colleagues internationally, exposing our students to more voices and new ideas. And for me, the idea of a larger community connecting easier via digital platforms is something that wouldn't be as easy if it wasn't the pandemic. So delivering, of course, online teaching was very challenging for everyone. For me, the feedback I got from students was the biggest thing they missed was the peer-to-peer learning. I mentioned before experimenting with new ways of delivering the practical sessions at home, and we use kits with collection objects, with materials and tools, and with an instructor being online. It wasn't the easiest thing, but it was done. And I think this actually pushed us, even though we returned to the labs last January, to create these self-learning exercises, not to replace the time students spend in the lab, but in addition to them, to allow the students to connect with the object on their own and to develop their skills following experimentation and trial and error processes without having pressure to do things right the first time round. So overall, I would say that there are a lot of things that we could help us move forward teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fula. Coming from a post-secondary institution that is online myself, I still can relate to what you said, even though like we have been offering courses online, but there are challenges that we have to deal in terms of peer-to-peer, experiences and learning. So thank you so much for that. And Terence, I would like to invite you to share with us your comments and thoughts about the first question. What did you discover? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Concerning the first question, which is looking in what the pandemic really revealed to us in Cameroon, is that the COVID-19 pandemic in Cameroon started in March 2020, and it was really felt in the cultural heritage sector, besides the tourism sector. These are two areas where we're very much impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, looking into what really revealed to us was, we realized that so many activities and projects were suspended, at the beginning of the year, early 2020, and even mid the year. Then the government also had to review the budgets of some ministries, and the Ministry of Arts and Culture, where we conservation professionals belong, really saw a reduction in our budget of the ministry. And we equally found out that we also discovered and we also realized that activities like even training opportunities for students, they had to shut down in schools. They could not have access to internships, because we have some institutions of higher learning that train professionals in conservation. So most of them had a year gone by without any internship opportunities in institutions like the National Museum where I work. And The National Museum also, where we have collections in storage, we also had some difficulties, challenges, like we had with the French Ministry of Culture. The Ministry of Culture in France had to assist Cameroon in the modernization of the National Museum, and the experts they had to stop and they had to push the project forward. And right up to now, 2021, we haven't we just started with the theoretical phase online, and these are one of the areas where the pandemic reveals to us that really we could not benefit from practical hands-on deck expertise from the French experts. And also, we equally realize that the pandemic also revealed to us that there is need for like teleconservation or online or virtual conservation, really, which is not really the case in Cameroon, because if we would have practiced, we can move towards teleconservation methods, like conserving collections online, documenting them, and then that will help in when there are situations like this, we could be able to meet up with the challenges in the domain of conservation. And as well, when we are also the pandemic equally in the domain of conservation, we are working on our first cultural project of nomination file for the World Heritage List. And it is a cultural landscape of the Mandara Mountains. We had some financings from the African World Heritage Fund, which was made at the disposal of Cameroon since, but due to the coronavirus, it was delayed payments, and that had to delay in the mounting of the file. Technicians and all those who were involved in it had to also had some delays, and then go down to the field, work on conservation methods, because it's a dry stone site where constructions are there. And in the management plan, we had to program for the conservation and how to recruit experts. Even the site manager was supposed to be appointed, and then for activities to go on. But the coronavirus had to delay all these. Some projects were halted, others were completely cancelled because of lack of finances, and students were blocked at home. They could not get access to internships like in the National Museum. Is this year we have had interns, and we are currently working with some interns from the Institutes of Fine Arts, those who are in cultural heritage and specialists in conservation. So those are some of the what essential issues the pandemic revealed to us in Cameroon and at the National Museum in particular. Thank you very much, Prof. I think we'll be looking forward for the next question.
Thank you, Terence. Thank you. And I think you have raised so many different important points here in your comments, you know, talking about internship students work, museums, and also about like World Heritage Conservation and World Heritage Nomination. Sometimes we forget the impact of pandemic in terms of preparatory work. And, you know, as Simon, you know, mentioned it, the international experts traveling for evaluation. So it's so multi-layered, and it's unbelievable. So thank you again, everyone, for your comments. I think now we are going to open a poll for us to taking like 1 minute or 2 minutes. We'll see how it goes. We are asking you a few questions. Please remember to scroll down, everyone, to see the last option or the last two options in your in the list. So I invite everyone to participate. So we have an e-poll, and we'll have a moment. I believe ICCROM colleagues will let us know when the results are in, right? Maybe another 30 seconds. So just a quick reminder that you can choose more than one option if you haven't completed the poll yet. So we'll stop in 2-3 seconds. Okay, maybe we could wrap it up now. Waiting to see the results. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I think there are some consensus around international connections, workplace health and safety, of course, digital documentation, hands-on learning, training opportunities are also highlighted. And of course, accessibility to learning resources. So there are some common experiences and issues that we have been facing. And hopefully we can get a result sometime soon with the vaccinations being unrolled in different countries. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your contribution, everyone. I would like to turn it over to Zeka for the next round, please.
Thanks, Shabnam, and thanks to all panelists for answering to the first question of the day. So we'll now move to the second one, which will ask you now to look outward. And it's a little bit more provocative. And here it goes. So the second question is, in the context of discussions about what is essential in society, how would you discuss whether conservation is a social necessity? That's the question. And I would like to kindly start with Eleonora and Fedra, because I think they also want to share some of the results of the poll that connect to the one you just done yourself. So over to you, Eleonora and Fedra. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. Yes, we actually included the very same question in our survey because obviously we wanted to pose this question to our students and see how heritage conservation and new societal issues would collide. So we actually included these and got some interesting results. Let me see if I can share my screen. Once again, there we go. Okay, I'm going straight to my bar chart. No, it's not going straight to the bar chart. Okay, I have to go through the whole thing. There you go. So yes, here you can get an idea of what was deemed as a priority and in terms of heritage conservation, and also in terms of different social experiences and needs. And students have responded to the second questions, looking out in many interesting ways. Well, basically on one hand, they expressed their ideas and opinions about heritage conservation as a priority within the heritage sector. So you can see, for example, from the graph, the importance of risk management and other conservation operations. And on the other hand, they provided input on current social priorities that directly impacted their experience as heritage conservation students during the pandemic. So of course, there are also conservation ethics related motivations for these responses, but also motivations linked to economic recovery of the cultural sector in the post-COVID world, since museums and heritage sites can be economic catalysts. The survey also showed that, besides the obvious importance of practical work opportunities and the development of alternative skills, students were concerned about health and safety, especially mental and emotional health issues, which, as we know, have seen a surge globally during the pandemic. And some students even expressed that they would have appreciated a mental health break when their universities had to close down. And it is not surprising that they saw socialization opportunities such as peer learning and networking, of course, virtually, as essential to overcome prolonged inactivity and isolation. In addition to that, they expressed they wish to stay connected with their heritage conservation community in order to stay ahead of the curve in terms of the most recent changes triggered in our sector by the pandemic. So this is in a nutshell, what they expressed in terms of looking out. And once again, Fedra will provide more details about this. And please, Fedra, let me know when you want me to go to the next slide.
Sure, actually, could you go to the next slide, please?
There you go. Oops.
One more.
One more. Okay.
All right. So when we ask the second question.
Is this the right one?
No. You went too far. Yes, that's the one.
No. Okay. Nope.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's the graph after the looking out slide. Thank you. That's the one.
This one?
Okay, so as you can see, yes. No. It's question number 2, Eleonora. We had a graph.
Okay, this is the bar chart.
Looking out, then the next slide.
This is what I have.
After the bar chart, the first graph after the bar chart. Yeah, there we go. So we asked students during COVID, did you consider conservation being a priority compared to other heritage management activities? And as can be seen on the graph, over 63% of students responded that conservation was indeed a necessity or should at least be, even during the pandemic. Amongst the 63%, the majority of students emphasize the essential nature of monitoring work along with preventive conservation. That is, any indirect action aimed at increasing the life expectancy of cultural heritage. Students have expressed that the lower numbers of visitations of sites and museums would have been a perfect opportunity for prioritizing conservation work and reassessing the deterioration processes affecting the heritage in question. They mentioned that the lack of conservation staff on site would be fine for a short period of time, but not sustainable in the long term, especially knowing that the pandemic has now lasted 1.5 years, and we don't know how long it is going to continue this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eleonora and Fedra. So it was very clear that the priority from the students' perspective was actually to have hands-on learning and training opportunities and also access to learning resources. Slightly different from what our audience referred to as the highest priority, which was the workplace safety and international collaborations. I think in order to get a good grasp of the impact of the pandemic, it's important to look at all the different perspectives from across the profession and considering also tomorrow's professionals. So I'd like to move now to Vula. Vula, how about you? How would you discuss whether conservation is a social necessity? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Zeb. So I think the pandemic forced all of us to reconsider our values and ways of living. And we saw in action the impact we have on the environment. And it makes it inevitable that we find better ways to live with greater respect to the environment. So having this in mind, conservation as a field can provide alternative practical ways of sustainable living and working, and as such, I see it as a social and environmental necessity. This past year has brought into focus the severity of the global challenges that are unfolding and how urgent it is to address issues such as inequality, the legacy of colonialism. We saw what happened last year with the Black Lives Matter movement and how conservators got involved somehow, the climate crisis, the economic downturn, and many more. So all of this raised many important questions about the role of heritage in today's world. And some of these questions were quite negative. So in order to respond, we need actually to change the ways in which we think about, care for, and use heritage and museum collections, which in turn necessitates a very long overdue, for me, revision of thinking and doing in conservation, from theory to practice, to management, to preventive and remedial treatments, to inclusivity and how it can be improved within our sector. So there are many issues to discuss and many ways in which we can work in the future. The last thing I would like to say is that we're dealing with heritage and art, and we often take for granted how important they are. And we know that they provide comfort, a sense of belonging, education, and of course we know that art challenges established ideas, push boundaries and ways of thinking, and provide an alternative way of looking at things and beauty. So if heritage and art are essential, of course their conservation is a necessity. And not to mention, of course, that online exhibitions that happened during the pandemic, especially during periods of lockdown, provided an important didactic and enjoyable activity that was different to what people were used to. So I think conservation of artworks and heritage provides a window to a hidden world that can be magical. And I think we often underestimate how we can provide this to people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vula, so for bringing up the complexity and the multiple facets that heritage plays in society. You know, this amazing role in all these different spheres that you refer to enhance the role of conservation to underpin and enable that. And as you said, I think the pandemic provided a moment for reflection, rethinking, maybe repositioning. So let's see how concretely emerge out of this looking forward, which will be the third question. Thank you very much. I would like to move to Terence. Terence, how about you? How would you discuss whether conservation is a social necessity? Thank you. Over to you. Hello, Terence, are you there? You're on mute. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, looking at and in the society as if conservation is a social necessity. Yeah, during this period of the pandemic, I would say in Cameroon we have institutions, national and international institutions that accompany or that helps our communities, because Cameroon happens to be having made up of 250 ethnic groups under one country with different languages, but they have been divided into 4 cultural areas that is, that shares the same characteristics, cultural characteristics. So we have institutions that accompany these communities to help them conserve their cultures, their material, their tangible and intangible cultural heritages. So conservation for posterity has always been one of the main at the limelight nowadays, because they look at it as sustainability. In other, the means of call them sustainability. So how do we conserve them for see what we have? Communities have been developing local museums, royal museums, where they can conserve their cultural heritages. So we have in each of the villages or each of these ethnic groups, they have put forth museums, small museums, depending on the resources they have, that they can be able to conserve them. We equally have the government that is accompanying the population or the society in general, because remember the museum is there for the development of the society as well. It has a developmental role. So when we see conservation being done, is that nowadays we have young professionals that are interested in pursuing a career in it. So they have to work with those and then sensitize the populations that they need to conserve these cultural objects so that their future generations will be able to see what they have. So it is becoming one of the main, becoming a stake now in Cameroon, that we have institutions like La Route de Chefferie, that is sensitizing the population, the custodians of the traditions, that you don't need to put aside, you don't need to underlook your objects, or you need to valorize them. And in these objects, they will have to conserve them. They have to ensure that they are being protected. And the government also has put in place a policy, legal policy, to see that objects and places of patrimonial values are protected, are conserved, well conserved, and how they can ensure for transmission. Because not only preservation or conservation, but we need to ensure that this is transmitted to the future generations. So they need to encourage, they are like encouraging the population to develop conservation methods and to be able to transmit it to future generations. So it is a social necessity in Cameroon, and the society is well much aware of it. They are culturally oriented and they are working towards that. Thank you very much, Jose. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Terence. It's really interesting to hear how the role of conservation has been embraced and recognized at the national level, as a way to sustain and support the development of communities, and with that to ensure our transmission of values and continuity. So thank you very much for that. Before we move on, I'd just like to remind our dear audience, if you have questions, please put them on using the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. We'll be happy to take some of them towards the end. Now I would like to move on to Simon. Simon, what are your views on this one? Thank you.
Again, I work with buildings and with on sites, and so the issues are slightly different. But at the end of the day, not. And I think that I keep returning to the same point, which is economic, because when we're going to talk about sustainable, the people that I'm training, we're training to involve them in work, and if they're not working, they don't have an income. Now the course we did in Tripoli in Lebanon was for refugees and for local people, and they actually got per diem. And that was actually, given the state of the dollar at the time, turned out to be almost a salary. So a lot of them applied originally because of the per diem. It was then up to us to convert them. So we trained them, and none of them had held a chisel before. But by the end, they were doing extraordinary work, which I'm not going to show you, but they were building and carving exceptional things, and they had all become conservators, restorers. Some of them wanted to go on into conservation, some of them just wanted to cut stone, but they were being, we hope, are being channeled into the employment. And this was hugely important in a situation of that case where COVID has compounded everything. Lebanon is not dependent on tourism, especially where we were, except a little bit that they hold on a sec. Stop. The tourism in Cambodia has had a vast impact. The drop in, whereas in Lebanon there are obviously not very many tourists. There are a lot of people coming up from Beirut to Tripoli because Tripoli has no COVID restrictions because everyone is ignoring them. So there is tourism there, but the tourism is a big impact. So it kind of depends how much the role of tourism plays in the country on the kind of impact it's had. So I do think that the type of training and the conservation that we were doing was essential, and I think that the conservation is essential. The other thing that I've noticed here is that with the complete disappearance of tourists, the use of the temples is in some ways returning. The only people who were in the temples were actually using them for religious purposes. So they were venerating the important parts of the temple, and they were starting to use the countryside around it for picnics, and it had come back to the Cambodians. Instead of having 4 million tourists a year and huge tour buses, suddenly there were people in hammocks enjoying their heritage again. So ironically, that is a positive. I've kind of thrown a lot of different things onto the table, but like I said, what is curious, and I think this whole thought process has interested me a lot, was that the heritage is not suffering at all here, Cambodia. In fact, it's being conserved better because the tourism is a huge factor for damage. Nature is returning. The birds and the animals have come back. The monkeys have disappeared because they were being fed by the tourists, and they're no longer being fed by the tourists. So the authenticity is some ways is returning. However, the people are suffering terribly because of the economic impact. I think that will probably do me for the moment. We'll come back to that in the last part, but thank you again very much.
Thank you, Simon, for highlighting very clearly the economic aspect of conservation in terms of sustaining livelihoods in such critical conditions. Thank you. So I would like to move on now to Audrey. How about you, Audrey? How would you discuss whether conservation is a social necessity? Over to you. Thank you.
Conservation is an identity. Therefore, in this context, it is a social necessity. Heritage is part of our society and humans as social beings. Though resources may be limited, we cannot just abandon conservation. Just like in disasters or in wars, we always have to find ways to save it until we run out of options and resources. So keeping our heritage, conserving it, helps us to move forward. Times and perceptions may change. So in conservation practice, it is important for cultural understandings to be incorporated particularly on how communities experience it. So just like the churches we are rebuilding, these are not simply relics of the past, but they are part of their living heritage. So the pandemic definitely delayed our projects, so not to mention also affected our well-being and stretching the patience of everyone. The community wants the church finished already because they want to go out and use the church. So a better understanding leads to better appreciation for conservation and heritage development. There's still so much work to do, but of course the work gets better and more fulfilling when the community is involved and when everyone collaborates.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for this thoughtful reflection on how heritage is so closely and intricately interweaved with everyone's lives, and hence not the role of conservation. Thank you. And then last but not least, Claire, would you like to share your thoughts with us? Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps this is a question I struggled with the most, and I hope I haven't gone off track. Is conservation a social necessity? Well, I think so. I went away to read reports. I was reading the UNESCO report on museums around the world in the face of COVID-19, and there it is. The role of museums in society is essential. Therefore, preserving collections in museums must be essential. I spoke to colleagues. They all agreed, yep, absolutely. And I realized that I was probably in an echo chamber talking to people who work in heritage. So I spoke to my friends, I'm a conservator. Do you think this is essential for society? And pretty much all of them came back and said, we don't really actually understand what you do, which is a bit disappointing and proves that I'm probably not a really good ambassador for the profession. So I suppose this led me into this kind of thoughts about if conservation is essential to society, how come nobody really knows who we are or what we're doing? And this really came to my mind a couple of times in the pandemic. One of the times was I was reading a Guardian article, Guardian's a newspaper here, about the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it was shared on social media because the security team really stepped up and did a lot of roles in the museum that they wouldn't usually do because they're initially the only people that had access. And just as a side, I think that's great. I think everyone in a museum or heritage institutions should see part of their role as to care for the heritage. And then the article went on to talk about conservators and all the work they'd done just before the pandemic, as they were leaving the museum, and during the pandemic, what they, the things they'd sort of put into place to look after the collections. And it's a really sort of positive story. And then the article finishes on, but the V&A is going to cut conservation posts. So there's really mixed messages about the importance of conservation in that one article. The second time I really thought about the visibility of conservation was, I should say that Spencer & Fry does a lot of work with the film industry. So we supervise film crews that are using heritage locations for all numbers of reasons. It used to be period dramas, but now superheroes need a mansion, and fantasy always seems to take place in historic houses as well for some reason. But the film industry, thankfully for us, restarted extremely quickly. And this was partly because professional bodies produced guidance about how they thought they could film safely, and partly because Tom Cruise personally phoned up the culture secretary in the UK and argued that the film industry should be exempt from COVID restrictions. His points being that the film industry brings in lots of revenue for the country, which I think you could argue so does cultural heritage. And he argued that a lot of people that work in the film industry are freelancers or work for small companies, which I also think you could argue about conservation. But he got his way, and the film industry was exempt from a lot of restrictions. They could travel and they could carry on filming in big groups of people. So I know that there is work being done to make conservation more visible. ICON at the moment has just produced a report on the values of conservation, but it sort of made me wish that conservation had a Tom Cruise.
Okay, so that's a good wish, I think. And in the meantime, I think it also brings a reflection to everyone, like how can we do a better job in communicating on the importance of conservation to the wider audience. Thank you very much, Claire. I think, I mean, look at everyone's reflections. I think it's clear, like clear message that connecting with our cultural heritage in its multiple forms, from traditions to places to art and literature, the crafts, symbolic and historic items, etc., is essential. It's an essential ingredient for individual and collective well-being as communities, and which we normally take for granted. And I think hence not maybe the difficulty to communicate that. And the disruption caused by the pandemic highlighted the importance of this connection in our lives. So we had the time to pause and reflect and feel it, because of that disruption. And I think, like, while acknowledging that basic needs such as food, shelter, and healthcare are imperative, heritage is also key source and reference to our identity, as was said, the sense of belonging, enjoyment, learning, and also livelihood, as you all so nicely put. And then I think then conservation becomes essential to provide continuity by making sure that heritage remains in good condition, accessible, and ready to use by everyone. So with that, I thank you very much. We conclude the second question. We will now have a 5-minute break, after which we'll continue to the third and last question, which will be moderated by Jane. And then we'll have time allowing a question and answer session. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. Stay tuned and have a good break.
So as people come back in, and we welcome them back, some of us perhaps jogging back to our seats, we'll go to the last question, which is about looking forwards. And we would encourage all of you in the audience to think about answering that question as well. So although the Q&A says Q&A, we're also happy to hear your perspective on this question, because I think this is where we want to take this conversation next. So the question that I have to put to everyone is, which is looking forward, is in supporting conservation and conservation learning, what have you worked hard to maintain as essential in your work, and how might this impact on your future practice? So we're really looking here at what lessons we think will stick as a result of this, and possibly finding the positives. If I can start with Simon, if you're able to get to your microphone. I can't actually see Simon, so it's a little bit unfair. In which case I might just get Claire, because I can definitely see Claire, and she might have Tom Cruise tucked away there, so we're quite excited.
No, he would shout at me for not socially distancing properly. So I sort of took this question as what sort of skills did we work on during the pandemic? And I know that a lot of conservators who are friends were working on their hand skills to keep muscle memory, and that was really important. However, I'm a preventive conservator, so I don't use hand skills quite so much. So what was really important for us in lockdown was to keep up to date our conservation knowledge, and we were able to do that with all the online training and resources that I mentioned. But what's really important to us to implement that knowledge is that we use our soft skills, which I think is a bit of a rubbish term, to be honest. Some people call them power skills, which I think is a bit better. So negotiation, conflict resolution, problem solving, working under pressure, and decisiveness. And I'm really ashamed to say that I did not absolutely do anything to maintain these during lockdown, partially because I was just trying to get through the day, teach my children, find toilet roll, whatever we were dealing with back last year. And I just kind of assumed that people had these skills, or you just spoke to people, and that you didn't really have to develop them. However, when we finally did go back out to work, I think we stopped work in March. We were working on The Crown. So the TV program, not the thing the Queen puts on her head, that shut down in March, and we weren't back out working with film crews and heritage sites till July. So that was 4 months at home, really not communicating with anyone apart from my family or people on Zoom calls. So when we got back out to work, and I was speaking to my colleague Charlotte about this, all these kind of skills were a bit rusty. We couldn't really think under pressure. We found it hard to be decisive. Wearing masks didn't help. We were trying to communicate to people with half our faces covered, but we were really out of practice of just trying to negotiate with people. So going forward, we've realized how important these skills are, and we're working on nurturing and developing these skills. We've had training in assertiveness. This is partially just to help us, but also because I think the heritage world is sort of on the passive end of the assertiveness scale, and the film industry is very much on the aggressive end of the assertiveness scale. So we're trying to improve our communication with them. And we've also had mental resilience training so that we are still able to communicate when we're under pressure, and that we have the tools to react when we are under pressure. Thank you.
That's so interesting, because it's lovely to hear conservators talking about tools and it not necessarily being about scalpels and porcupine quills, but things that we shouldn't put down and we need to maintain, otherwise they get rusty, to extend the metaphor. Simon, is it okay to call on you?
Yes, it is.
So just to restate, we were asking you to look forward and what you've worked hard to maintain and how that might impact on your future practice.
Yes, the thing that everybody has noted, and I saw that in the poll as well, was obviously about health and safety. We did manage to implement a course, as I told you, in Lebanon, which was extremely problematical. But we did take that risk, but we did it in a responsible way. So we had to take certain measures. which was the usual social distancing and so on, we actually designed the workshop so that the bankers on which the people were working were much further apart than they normally would be. We did have the space, so we built them all 4 meters apart. We temperature tested everybody each morning, and what we did, because there was we had to take things into our own hands and assess the risk and decide, how much we wanted to take. There was quite an impact on the budget as well, because I decided that the only way to seriously control the situation was to make sure that everybody on the course had a PCR every Friday. And that has a cost, because there were 40 students. We also had to have insurance, a special insurance, so that had a cost. The testing, we would do the tests on the Friday, and the results would be in by Sunday, and anybody who was positive would go home until they were negative. But we also made sure that those people continued to get their per diems even if they were sick, because we did have 10 cases out of 40. Which was quite a lot, though actually 8 of them were asymptomatic, so they didn't even know. So we did actually field quite a lot of problems. Those 8 people wouldn't have known that they were sick, and they would have passed it on to everybody else. So we were on the sharp end, but you can do it. I don't know if it would be allowed in another situation, probably because of regulations and so on. But we were in that situation, and we managed to do it, and we got a good result. So that for me was the thing that I really learned, was that as I said before, the whole COVID thing actually puts into practice a lot of the theory that we've talked about. The thing about risk assessment, risk management, about are things truly sustainable? Suddenly, they've just got to be, and because you have to stop if you can't. So that was. It's proving to be a real test of a lot of the things that we've all talked about so often. But as we mentioned, one responding to question 2. I believe there was a huge social necessity in the situation we were in. We weren't just providing them with a livelihood, but we were actually giving hope to refugees who'd come from the war in Syria, and we were at the end of the course, when we did a survey on what people felt. It was actually really moving to hear how much it did mean to them, not just because they were getting, I don't know, $25 a week, but a lot of them said, it's given meaning to my life again. I mean, they said some really, really moving things, which, of course, we all hope that's the case, but it genuinely was. We were training men and women from all walks of life, all religions, and all of them, sometimes at different levels, but all of them felt there was a huge impact. So, yeah, working practices have had to change a lot, or maybe not change. They've just been pushed into practice. They're really testing us, and perhaps they do actually work, which is a good thing. So I was pleased, and a lot of the feelings that I had about the importance of heritage and how to work with it and how to train have been tested, but I think that they've been proved to be effective at the end of the day, which has been pleasing.
Wonderful, and I hope to hear more about that project in the international conservation community and in the museum community going forward, because I'm sure many other people will be inspired by that. I'm going to move on to Audrey next, just again to remind people in the audience that they are more than welcome to type in their lessons, what they've gained from the pandemic that they will take forward with them. Audrey, can I move to you?
Yeah, so conservation and conservation learning never ends. We have to continuously improve, acquire new skills, and adapt as our times, environment, and technology change. Documentation is as a fundamental task in conservation. And we learned during the pandemic that we had a lot to work on in our recording and documentation procedures, especially that we are increasingly going digital and online. This was mentioned earlier too, that the pandemic brought great opportunities for online trainings and strengthen in-house skills development to further hone and equip us. Unlike before, when trainings were done face-to-face in physical settings, now online trainings and lectures like this have been made accessible. So moreover, social media added to our enhanced documentation, and this must be fully utilized even after the pandemic. Conservation is a multifaceted and interdisciplinary endeavor, and in this context, diffusion of methodologies and technologies is key in developing suitable integrated approaches in heritage conservation. As a last note, conservation and conservation learning must be shared. And as government cultural agency, my institution, the National Museum of the Philippines, must continue its role as culture brokers in capacitating and facilitating technical assistance and skills training for our partners, communities, and stakeholders, whether online, on-site, or off-site. Thank you.
It's wonderful to hear not only about the opportunities but also the responsibilities, because that really does, give a challenge to us all. What responsibilities will we pick up to continue the sharing and to continue those professional networks and partnerships, as well as to continue to benefit from them? I think it's easy to see yourself as the recipient, but actually what are you putting out there is a really good challenge to us all. Can I turn to you, Vula, for your view on the future?
Of course, thank you. I will start with working in a supportive, positive environment as essential. And these conditions were challenging for all of us. But we need to keep in mind that not everyone copes the same way. Eleonora and Phaedra actually mentioned mental health. So we should maintain a flexible approach and a positive approach when we deal with human beings. I would like also to maintain the sustainable ways of working and living that became part of everyday life. So we all walk more over the last year, are and should remain aware of our impact to the environment. And I think there is a lot here for us as professionals that we can help reduce carbon footprint, which of course implies that we will have changes in the way we carry out certain practices. Maintaining a dialogue with professionals in museums, heritage institutions, universities, exchanging ideas about teaching and learning, and finding alternatives to everyday conservation practices is very important. I feel like being part of a supportive community is essential and should be maintained. And also maintaining a dialogue with colleagues and students to develop further courses and provide the necessary support needed to practicing conservators. And this, of course, leads me to research, that we need to focus on impactful research and, of course, innovative educational courses that will have a long-term impact to the field. Claire mentioned that we talk to each other and it's like an echo chamber, and I couldn't agree more. We need to work with colleagues in other fields, learn from them, and actually be ready to cross-pollinate ideas to move our field forward. So we need to have this open mind, to have transparency, to promote collaboration and a more inclusive approach so we can strengthen our professional community. And as to what will not be retained, I don't know, but whatever is not returned, it was never essential. So I personally, I'm fine with it. Thank you.
I think perhaps, Rula, you are not going to retain quite so much traveling and waste from what you're saying, and you won't miss it. But perhaps I misunderstood that. Terence, I'm going to come to you next. Are you able to talk to us about what you have taken positively and forward from the experience?
Yes, thank you very much. The pandemic has revealed, and we have learned a lot from this pandemic that started last year. And in supporting conservation learning, and as one of the conservators of the National Museum of Cameroon and in charge of collections and storage, I have been able to learn a lot, acquire some traditional and modern techniques of conservation. This has helped us because with the coming of the COVID, the outbreak of the COVID has come with the coming of webinars, Zoom meetings, and which is really open to the public for those who can learn. And working in this domain also has been challenging. Due to the limited resources, we have Cameroon happens to be a developing country in Central Africa. And the essential aspect of this job, of my job as a conservationist, conservator, has been to limit the deterioration of collections, be able to train others, and to be able to ensure that these techniques or our collections are really well conserved, well protected. But this has also exposed us to some of the challenges, and in the domain of perspectives, what I really look forth and put forth is challenges in the domain of ICTs in conservations, how we can use ICT in conservation, and maybe other countries in the first world, the second world, advanced in this domain, but we still have challenges in the ICT domain because we need to document our collections, and we need good skills and techniques to document them. Then we equally have opportunities, like training opportunities for further training, learning, like internships, scholarships. In the domain of conservation in Cameroon, doctoral programs are absent in Cameroon completely in the domain of cultural heritage. So it becomes challenging in Cameroon, and we look forward for that if there are opportunities, training opportunities like that, young professionals may get further their educations in terms of internship, fellowship, scholarships that will help them to be more professional oriented. Then we equally have, there is need for networking of professionals. We need the young professionals to network with seasoned conservators, so that there is need for transmission of knowledge, skills, experience, and a lot more from the seasoned professionals in the domain of conservation to the young conservators that are growing up. We need that mingling. We need to mingle, and then we need to learn from them, and need to share experiences from countries in Africa, from the continent, from various continents, because conservation techniques may be related to your continent, how the traditional techniques may be used, but we equally need technical assistance in that domain. Well, we also see that one of the perspectives also in Cameroon is that we have learned through webinars, we have learned from other countries and other conservators that there is need for risk management, like Simon is saying, risk management techniques and other safety measures to be put in place, because conserving without ensuring that there is a good protection policy will lead us to nowhere, because like a fire outbreak, if we don't have the means or measures put in place, safety measures, we may conserve our collections or whatever we are conserving, then one morning, within a couple of hours, and then they are all destroyed. So there is a need for risk management and safety measures for us to be able to put in place. I think in sum, the future is bright with conservation, and we have young professionals in Cameroon. Cameroon happens to, in the past 10 years, entering into the field of conservation. So we don't have enough, or we don't have many seasoned conservators in Cameroon, but we have young conservators who are just getting hands on the job. Thank you. I think that is all we have for now.
No, that's plenty. Thank you, Terence. There's so much to think about in all that. But I think it's really nice to really turn our attention to the young conservators and their contribution to the way forward, which is why I've kept Fedra and Eleonora until the end. I don't know which one of you would like to speak first.
I will be speaking first this time. Eleonora, could you please share slide 13? Thank you very much. So when asked this question, the majority of students, about 45.6% of them, affirm that they have worked hard in finding opportunities to improve their practical skills. So once again, the idea of practical skills as essential comes back again. And this was done by making the most out of in-person training sessions, or on site, or in the lab, by attending as many as legally possible, or by undertaking new crafts at home during their spare time. So I've had students telling me that they started painting more, they started pottery making, knitting, or even paint by numbers. I personally started mosaic making during that time to improve my manual skills. And another way was by finding volunteering opportunities and internships. The second aspect of conservation learning, which students considered essential to work on, was personal research. So about 23.5% of students spend a significant amount of time this past year researching resources in area of interest within the heritage conservation field. This was done through literary research and online learning opportunities. Those online learning opportunities included short courses, watching YouTube videos related to chemistry, or summarizing and demonstrating conservation treatments, or by attending webinars. With the increase of webinars online and online conferences, another popular answer, about 20.5%, was that students worked hard in finding opportunities to create and maintain connections by attending as many online events as possible, networking with peers and other students attending, asking questions during those events, and asking questions through follow-up emails. As many institutions have moved online as a result of the pandemic, a number of students expressed that an essential skill to improve for the sake of their future employability was their digital skills. So that was answered by about 8.8% of students. Finally, one student expressed the increasing need for language learning, which would then increase the students' chances in finding employment in a larger geographical area. Thank you. I will now pass the word to Eleonora, who will give you more about student insights.
Thank you very much, Fedra. Yes, the development of haptic skills have definitely been a hot topic in the heritage conservation student communities, and students are very much looking forward to going back to labs as soon as it's safe to do so. Obviously, access to practical training and lab time have been very severely impacted by COVID. Students, however, have worked hard to find alternatives to institutional training in order to develop and maintain those practical skills, because obviously they want to be competitive in the heritage conservation job market, which is quite a tight market. So obviously, they want to develop those skills and, to find new opportunities to explore new scenarios for sure. Many of the students, as Fedra mentioned, they found in a self-directed study an opportunity to explore their interests and passions, other turned to online tutorials or experimented with what they had available. This is an aspect of heritage conservation learning that we have already seen during the first webinar and during the first wave of COVID. So in this sense, not much has changed between first and second COVID waves. Looking forward, where restrictions still apply, students suggest us a wide range of alternatives and approaches that universities could embrace to make their learning experience more meaningful. And I'm going to name, just a few of them, because obviously we surveyed a fairly large amount of students, and they have been, quite vocal in what they were expecting going forward. So for example, they suggest increased access to online learning resources, virtual site visits, or some sort of virtual field trips. For example, the museums I worked for had a program for post-secondary students that was called Virtual Human Library. And in this case, we also hosted some sessions with conservators. So they would share, so our museum people would share, their skills and knowledge with the next generations of museum professionals. Students also suggest increased flexibility. This is something that Sarula already mentioned. So for example, they suggest, to open up the labs during the weekend, so they could go in during those times, or even improving faculty communication processes and finding strategies to keep the cohort group connected by increasing meetings, seminars, peer learning opportunities. So, reestablishing that human connection that COVID almost took away from us. Another thing was about adjusting tuition to compensate for the lack of access to, again, lab facilities or services, and even work placement opportunities. And yes, definitely students have been very vocal about this point. And last but obviously not least, access to emotional and mental health resources to deal with the pandemic stress. So the other hot topic that we observed and, that students expressed their concern about was employability. And I'm going to turn to this slide. So you can see that after a year of reduced practical training, 51.8% of the students do not feel actually confident in their skills. And they are looking for more opportunities to get back what the pandemic took away from them, and to gain that confidence again. So this is a pretty interesting data. And I just want to conclude on a positive note, because, even though this scenario was extremely challenging, the majority of the students, a good 57.3% precisely, expressed that they felt supported by their course instructor, who tried to provide information regarding job opportunities, placements, and internship. And definitely students are looking forward to continuing this collaboration and this relationship with their instructors. So for sure, once again, it's all about networking, human connections, and gaining again that confidence that will make the next generation of conservators competitive, and they will definitely be connecting with us even in the future, sharing again their experiences, because probably we're going to continue this survey just a little tiny bit to discover a little bit more about what is changing in the students' conservation community. And that's pretty much it from me.
So thank you, Eleanor. If you could stop, that's wonderful. So there's still a chance for people in the audience to ask questions, and Zeka is going to take that over. I felt that it was really interesting lessons for the future, that when we're making our emergency preparedness plans, that we think about the skills that we're maintaining and how we're going to ensure that they are up to scratch. When we looked at our emergency planning, did we look at the digital preparedness and our readiness and our ability to communicate through digital means, because it seems that the investment that we put into relationships, not just about moving objects away from danger, because it's turned out in this particular crisis, the objects, as Simon was explaining, are almost safer without us there. But, but nonetheless, as a profession, what we might need has been an investment in the relationships with our peers, with our co-workers, with our supervisors, and I think as well came through really strongly with ourselves, with our own mental well-being, to commit to looking after those things. And I think that, Simon probably very much at the cutting edge there. He was out there, he almost had no choice but to make it work because of the context in which he was working. And it was really interesting to see how much could be made to work. And that by that commitment, I wrote down, he's got the benchmark of COVID. I think that from the future, when we're asking ourselves, is what we're doing sustainable? Is what we're doing as good as we think it is? And ask that, by the benchmark of COVID, would we still be doing this if we were under the pandemic? Would this actually work? Is it as sustainable as we think it is? And I think that will help us as the multifaceted profession that Audrey mentioned to really to grow and to understand about our sustainability. And I think that, our networks is what's critical for us to become and to continue to be a supportive, but in the future, perhaps a slightly more assertive community than we've been beforehand. And with that, I'll hand back to Jose to ask any questions.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks everyone for the reflection. So at this point, we still haven't got any questions coming in. So while we invite questions from our dear participants, maybe I could ask our esteemed panelists to share a one-sentence takeaway from the discussions we had in this webinar. And maybe if I may start with Audrey.
One sentence takeaway?
Yes, please.
The pandemic has really affected us in many ways, but I think what's nice about this this gathering now is that we realize that we have similar experiences, and for me, knowing that we're not alone in this crisis, so and we have a supportive international community, so the burden is lessened. So I hope we continue to support each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And then once again, if the attendees or the colleagues in the audience, if you have questions, please write them in the Q&A box. So moving on now to Claire. Claire, what would be your one sentence takeaway from today? Thank you.
I'm afraid it's actually very similar to what Audrey said. I think that, we're all in different types of conservation. We're in all, corners of the world. And there's lots of similarities in the pros and the cons. Yeah, sort of networking and sharing experiences will always benefit all of us.
Thank you. Vula?
I also agree, and working collaboratively, working smarter than before. I think pandemic showed us that there are alternative ways of doing things. So I think this will be what I will keep.
Thank you, Vula. Eleonora?
Yeah, definitely human connections, networking, peer learning opportunities. Those are some trends that emerged very strongly during the pandemic. Yeah, I definitely agree with what Sarula, Claire, and Audrey just mentioned. And I also wanted to thank all the students that participated in our survey and shared their experiences with us, because we learned so much from them. And I hope that what we discussed today might help both students and instructors to move forward, until the safety measures are lifted. So there is a lot to think about in what we discussed today. And I hope that, this might be a planting a small seed in both students and instructors.
Thank you. Fedra, would you like to go next?
Yes, from me as well. Thank you so much to all of you who participated in the survey. And if you have not, please do so. We would love to hear about your experience. Everyone's opinions matters, and we are just all here, one community of students all around the world, just trying to get through our studies, and we're all struggling together, and somehow we all manage. So yes, that I think it's been a challenging year for students, but we all have worked really hard, and we are very thankful for all of our professors who have helped us as well better ourselves and learn all of our skills.
Thank you. Terence, if you are there, would you like to share your one-sentence takeaway with us?
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Jose. I would like to start by thanking ICOM, IIC, and AU for such an opportunity, Pandemic Insights, and to say that the pandemic has really revealed to us that cultural or heritage conservation is very essential, and there is really need for us to go beyond the borders of just the practical and to be able to prepare for future. In the future, I think it has taught us a lot of some lessons we have learned from it, that we need to open up to the wider world. Webinars have come in. So if we could use such opportunities like this to raise awareness, and also some of the challenges or resolutions from this session should be used by ICROM, IIC, and AU, and for other partners or institutions to copy and also to use it to raise awareness, help into developing the domain. I am grateful for such an opportunity granted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Terence. And then last but not least, Simon.
Thank you, Jose. I think of the various things that this whole experience of your questions and participating in this, the thing that shocked me the most was that there's an inverse correlation between the fact that having COVID has actually meant that a lot of the heritage has taken a deep breath, and it's better because it's actually being conserved better. Things are going back to a level of good conservation purely because there's nobody here. But there is a complete inverse proportion between the good things that are happening to the heritage and the bad things that are happening to the people. So there's there's a detachment between what is good for the temples or the heritage and what is good for the local people. There are advantages, but I think that this detachment between the heritage and the life sustainability of the people is something that still needs to be really addressed, because it doesn't somehow make sense that the better the temples are due to COVID, the worse off the people are. I have no answers to that, but I think it's something that we do need to think about, especially when we're talking about people-based, working with communities, because communities, as Audrey said, especially in places like the Philippines, where the churches are so intensely used, the community is hugely important. And so that's my takeaway. Yes, that wasn't one sentence, that was rather a lot. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. In the meantime, we got one question from the audience, from Mayur Parekh. So here's the question: how can we protect museums' intellectual property from perils of infringement? Do we require to protect by copyright processes? I don't know, maybe for the more museum-oriented colleagues who would like to take that. I'm looking at maybe Claire or Audrey, Terence. Do we require to protect museum intellectual property by copyright process? And how can we do that? Or anyone else who would like to take that one? Audrey, yes, please.
I'm not sure what part, perils of infringement, what he's concerned exactly, but there are laws that protect intellectual property rights, so your country must have that. So it really depends on case-to-case basis, but there should be a law, and your museum should have a policy on that.
Thank you. Terence, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I will say for the case of Cameroon, protecting the museum, intellectual property right, we have the organization in place in Cameroon, but there is need for that because collections in a museum are the collective memory of the people or of those who made the objects, and there is need to protect that intellectual property of those who manufacture those objects. So there is really need for that, and depending on the country in which you find yourself, or in each country, the policies they are put in place. For example, in Cameroon, we are still developing in that domain. We haven't protected our collections and property rights already, but we are working towards that because we are working on an organigram which will soon fully be put in place in the months ahead. So I think it is important, and through the copyright process is also an important aspect to take consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terence. Jane, would you like to add something?
I was trying to suggest it had been answered live. I think it's such an important point that in our rush to digitize and make accessible, that we don't just welcome with open arms every opportunity of help, and that times that attention is made that we don't create a new area of colonialism whereby Western well-resourced organizations rush in and appear to be offering a massive digital opportunity, but in that there is a transference of intellectual property and the things that Terence was talking about. So I do think we have to have our guard up, and I think it's a really important question.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we are reaching the end of the webinar. And I would like then to conclude by firstly thanking all of our speakers who have so kindly given their time to be with us, and our colleagues from Athabasca University, Shabnam, and IIC, Jane, the co-organizers of this webinar, and also to our organizing team at ICROM, who have been working hard behind the scenes to bring all these webinars to you. And of course, I'd like also to thank very much our dear audience for joining us today. We hope this has been inspiring and giving you some food for thought in terms of the essential of conservation for us as individuals and professionals, for the community, for society, and for the future. The recording of the webinar will soon be made available on the ICROM website and also on ICROM's YouTube channel. And please stay tuned for our future webinars, which you'll see soon on your screen, of the ICROM lecture series. Here are the next ones. You can get additional information on the ICROM website and social media platform. So thanks again for being with us, and I hope you join us again soon. Best regards and stay well, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.